And joining me now is Alice Thomas. She is with Refugees International. Thank you so much for joining us. We heard some of the trends John mentioned, but give us a status update if you can. Talk about the pace that you've noticed happening over the last year when it comes to people fleeing their countries. Do you think it has slowed at all?
Well, I mean, the numbers show that it has slowed, but in overall, numbers have increased, of course, and we're seeing not only continuing outflows from countries, but also new outflows, particularly from South Sudan, which is now has seen the biggest increase of refugees leave South Sudan, but also other places like Afghanistan, and then, of course, the conflict in Syria continues to drive people. And then, what aren't addressed as much are people that are internally displaced who can't even get outside of the country. And in the Horn of Africa, just since the beginning of the year, we've seen 13 million people now facing food insecurity from recurrent drought. And in places like Somalia, where there's already a lot of conflict-related displacement, we're seeing hundreds of thousands of people, now 700,000 people, since in this year alone that have just fled the drought alone. So these conflicts are compounded by other factors, and they're, we're not seeing other conflicts ease in terms of the effect they have on forcing people to flee.
And that's something we don't hear about very often when we talk about the refugee issue. Yeah. Some of the challenges, of course, have remained the same, but you mentioned climate. Talk to us a little bit more about that and what we've seen, what you've seen, how that's impacted people.
So we see every year about 25 million people who are newly displaced from disasters, and the vast majority of those are weather-related disasters. So many more people are displaced by extreme weather than are displaced by conflict. But we don't know how long those people are displaced, and many of those people are able to return home, unlike refugees. Refugees, unfortunately, now most of them are displaced for decades, so they face different types of needs. I mean, people who are displaced for long periods of time, who are not likely to be able to go home anytime soon, like in Syria, they need access to jobs, they need access to healthcare services, and ultimately they need to be able to educate their children in the countries in which they've arrived, because they're not going home anytime soon. In terms of climate displacement, a lot of the climate displacement is just needing to respond to the enormous numbers. I mean, last year, the Asian Pacific saw the most weather-related disasters. I mean, more than 7 million people in China were displaced from extreme weather last year. Those people are huge numbers, and they need immediate assistance, and that puts just an enormous challenge on governments. From a legal standpoint, the problem is that the Refugees Convention doesn't extend to people who are displaced by disasters or climate change. So we hear about climate refugees, but unfortunately at present there is no international legal protection framework for countries to be able to accept people that may need to flee. And that includes some of the low-lying island states that are, between 3 and 9 feet above sea level that may in the future need to actually send people to live permanently abroad. So in terms of disaster and climate change, we have huge challenges ahead of us. There's an urgent need now to start to address that and to try to ensure that that does not happen. But it's already happening. In terms of refugees, it's just an ongoing challenge, and getting the political will to end these conflicts and just enough assistance to help people.
About 30 seconds left. Would you say the goal for all of these people is to eventually get back home? Is that still the dream and the hope?
I mean, I think for most people very much want to go home, and they want to be reunited with their country, their culture. For refugees who have been born in another country, and that's a lot of refugees. I mean, in Dadaab refugee in Kenya, there's, we're going on a 3rd generation of people. I mean, if your grandmother was born in Dadaab refugee camp, you don't know life in Somalia. You've never been to Somalia. You live in Kenya now. And that's where we need those people to be, to be able to resettle or to be able to integrate into the host country and get jobs and not live in a refugee camp for the rest of their life.
All right, Alice Thomas, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.